Okay, so hello and welcome to our Ether chat. Ether stands for Ethics and Aesthetics of Encountering the Other. Ether Networks brings together sociolinguists, educators, philosophers, musicians, artists, and other practitioners, and invites to explore the question, how do people of conflicting worldviews, memories, and future visions encounter each other? The first Ether seminar took place over 2 days in April and generated a vast range of themes and ideas, including language communication, language as trauma, word-body assemblages, empathy, solidarity, bureaucracy, hierarchy, flatten the hierarchy, personal histories, food, art, recipes, music, improvisation, and even magic. In preparation for the seminar, a number of participants submitted their provocations, either by writing a blog or recording a video presentation. During the seminar, the participants were invited to engage in a question exchange in response to the themes and topics raised in the provocations. And today I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Lara Krause, who made an incredibly valuable contribution by submitting her provocation and engaging in a meaningful conversation with the other panelists. Lara holds a PhD in African languages from the University of Cape Town and is currently working as an assistant professor at the Institute of African Studies at Leipzig University. Her interests cover a wide range of themes around languages, education, and the concept of the language itself. Some of Lara's co-authored publications include themes such as translanguaging, translingual innovation, testing practice, and these are just a few. And while continuing her work on language education in South Africa, Lara also inquires into Black Lives Matter protests in Germany, looking into word-body assemblages where protest slogans make alliances across people with different memories, life trajectories, and future visions. Lara, I'm so privileged to have you here today, and I can't wait to learn even more about your work, interests, background, and of course, your reflection on the Ether seminar. Thank you again for joining me today.
Thanks, Anna. Super happy to be here.
Thank you, Lara. Lara, your interests are so fascinating and intriguing. South Africa, Germany, Leipzig, education, languages, translanguaging, Black Lives Matters, posters and protests, and many, many more. Absolutely fascinating. But could you tell me more about your background and what sparks such a wide range of interests?
Well, I'm glad you find it really interesting. I find it sometimes a little bit confusing, but okay. Well, I lived in South Africa for a while. I went there after my high school for volunteering, which is, I think, a pretty classic story about how like a European would get involved. I was there for 3 months for the first time in 2009, and I worked in a literacy project at a school. And I think I had, like, as we say in German, an aha moment, which is like an aha moment that I realized that, okay, it's not a normal situation that you actually grow up with a particular way of speaking and you can use that way of speaking in school all the way up to the end of high school and then through university and then into the job. So at the time I would have said with a particular language. And because I realized that, like, closer speaking children would have to be, you know, instructed in English, and there would be lots of consequences that would come from this language policy for the kids. And since I was working with those kids, that sort of sparked my decision to actually study African studies, because that allowed me a focus on language and education with the particular profile that Leipzig University had at the time. So when I came back, I started studying African studies, and I sort of focused throughout my bachelor's and my master's on language policy in South Africa. And I went to do my master's research at a township school in Cape Town for my master's thesis. And then I sort of extended that or deepened that for a PhD project. And yeah, I guess sort of the content trajectory was in a way from this idea that, you know, mother tongue education should be the best, and like that was like my bachelor's thesis conviction, and then reading more and complexifying things, sort of landing up with a critique of like separate languages themselves and how actually the problem often is not that children are not taught in their mother tongue, but that they have actually a very fluid language background in urban areas, and that they actually confronted with two standard languages in school, which one of them their alleged mother tongue, and the other one this English, and their actual capabilities are not, they become invisible in this, you know, focus on languages. So I think then this whole thing developed into a critique of the concept of separate languages, and this is something I pursued in the PhD.
That's fascinating. I am personally very interested in languages and translanguaging as well. And I grew up in a very multilingual environment where we switched from one language to another, and I continued my academic interest in this field as well. So I really, really find it fascinating. Thank you. Thank you. So, so I would also like to know more about how does Ether Project and Ether questions resonate with you, your work, and your academic interests?
Yeah, I think there we come a little bit to the new interest that you've mentioned, which is about sort of protests, Black Lives Matter in Germany and those things. And actually it happened in a way that I was trying to think of a new project that would allow me to take forward this idea that is critical of languages, but also of the idea of language itself. And in conversation with my boss and colleague Rosine Kelz, who is also sort of very critical of representational theories of language and very critical of the notion of language itself from a philosophical perspective. We sort of talked this over a lot, you know, what could this be? And I sort of stumbled literally then one day after the Black Lives Matter protests across exactly this protest sign that I've been talking about, like, understand that I'll never understand, but I stand. And how it just is, sometimes you sort of think, there's something here, I'm not really sure what it is, but how could I treat this slogan in a different way that would include my theoretical interest of sort of dissolving this idea of language, or of a representational notion of language. And then I got the email from one of the email distributing lists from linguistic ethnography, I guess, about Ether and encounters with difference. And at that time I had already looked into Black Lives Matter a little bit. And then like my colleague also said, oh yeah, you have to do this, like this speaks exactly to what you're now engaging with the slogan and with these concepts of Karen Barad that I've been engaging with. So yeah, and then I wrote up the abstract, and
That's brilliant. And I really like also the idea that it's not just, for example, in one place, that it's such interdisciplinary project that it's across not only fields, but also countries, and that we have this opportunity to engage and develop these questions and see how these questions work in so many different fields. Very, very interesting, I think. Brilliant. So, so in terms of the seminar which took place in April, it would be very interesting to find out if there was anything that struck you the most, or perhaps there were any ideas that you found particularly interesting or maybe relevant to your work, perhaps inspiring, that you took away and what you wanted to learn or know more about.
Yes, so the first thing I have to say is sort of on a bit of a methodological note, because I very much enjoyed how the pairing up of the participants and then these sort of pair discussions. I hadn't really thought about such a thing as an option for a digital like seminar or something. And I actually plan to copy you guys and use this in one of my seminars, like set up like a reading partner list, you know, and then people can actually in the seminar have like a conversation and the others can listen, because I really enjoyed that. I thought that really made the most of this format. So I think that's one thing. And the pairing that was done with me and Helen, I think was fantastic. And I'll contact her as well, because we've got some things that I think we still need to discuss further. So that was fantastic. And then I think on a content note, I have three things. And the first one was a contribution by Thanda, when I think he said something like, well, in South Africa, like music and education, they're sort of extremely intertwined. They're almost, I'm not quoting him directly, but something like that.
Yeah.
And he gave the example of Tuta, which is this practice of listing in like a poetic fashion all the names of your ancestors. And I know this practice, and it's so interesting because I had never thought about it from that angle when he said, well, this is so important because it transfers all this information that we also need in order to know, like, for example, can we propose to somebody? Can we marry somebody? You know, in this practice, there is actually this essential education included. And it's so simple now that I heard it, but I never brought this together, you know, that actually in like oral practices, oral culture, there sort of lies this element in the sense. So, yeah.
And I must admit that it got me very interested in this as well. And even in my research, I started looking at the storytelling and the narrative inquiry and how to use stories and, you know, what's in, as Thanda said, what's in the songs, it's telling the stories, telling the history. And I'm looking into storytelling as a narrative inquiry to inquire about people's experiences in language learning and also use that as a background to get the information. I think it's a very, very powerful tool to do that.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah, so that was the one. I mean, I have two more if you want them.
Yes,
and the other one was from Steph Kent when she was talking about this translation with the like, I think it was like three groups of people, like the translator and then deaf people and then like another group. And she said at some point something along the lines of, you know, like the humanization of the translator, and that information should actually not be seen as like, or is not necessarily the most important thing. And it's okay that the translator plays a role, and there should be more attention to that. And I had never thought about that. But keeping in mind the sort of theoretically critical view I'm trying to gain on language, which is really sort of difficult, it gave me almost a new empirical starting point to think with, to take on board, because I think it's exactly this power of this idea as language, you know, as the sort of information transmitter, anything like that, that dehumanizes the translator. And once you bring the translator back in from the perspective that she's done it so fantastically in this talk, it gives you, yeah, as I said, it gives me a new example and a new access point to this idea of maybe a non-representational theory of language. So that was really cool. That's I really liked that. Yeah.
That's brilliant. I can almost see the light bulb in your head and that you're still thinking about this idea and making the links. That's absolutely brilliant. I can also see the concept here of the insiders and the outsiders perspective almost. You know, you're an outsider, but you also an insider here. That's great. Thank you. So you said one more point.
And then I think Rosine Kelz, when she gave the keynote, what I really enjoyed was when she talked about how sameness cancels out the possibility for relation. So this is something I've been sort of trying to formulate, and I always felt like I never really hit the nail on the head. And I thought that hit the nail on the head. And also this possibility of moving from knowledge, from to know to acknowledge. That sort of helped me, because I think it's another way of putting these theorizations of the slogan and like the protest practice with word body assemblages in an even sort of wider philosophical framework potentially. Don't ask me how exactly. It's just something that, you know, is still playing in my head, I would say. Yeah.
This is brilliant. Now, I think this is what we try to create, that space and the opportunity for everybody to engage and kind of digest this information and different ideas, and try to perhaps relate it to different fields and interests. And it's great to see how you manage to connect quite different and a range of ideas to your personal work and your academic engagements as well. That's very great to hear that.
Yeah, thank you for that opportunity. It was really great.
No, that's great to hear, because you know, you never know how people, it's again, Ether project connected so many different people and so many different practitioners as well. And how do you know, how do you create and how do you spark that and generate the thinking and connect the ideas together? And it's absolutely wonderful to see that it worked. It worked with you at least, and it's good to see that those connections are happening. Absolutely fantastic. Thank you, Lara. The final question from the Ether team is, could you draw, and you have already touched base on this, but could you draw any connections between your PhD work, which focus on translanguaging, and your more current arguments that you're making around science, protest and encounters with difference in relation to the Black Lives Matter?
Yeah, so the PhD work is a critique of translanguaging. So I'm not working, like, I mean, I include the notion of translanguaging in my theoretical background, and I sort of support it as a language political term that gathers a lot of support. And it also has a lot of dimensions outside the dimensions that I use, which are very much related to didactics and pedagogical practice in the classroom. So I'm not saying that like I disagree with translanguaging on the whole or something like that. It's just that my work is not on translanguaging, but it's like on the field of tension between fluid language use and a fixed standard code, if you wish. And I think the connection that I would draw to the newer project that I'm doing is that or maybe it was more like a need that I felt, because I had now for several years engaged with fluid language practices in an institutional setting that is very much directed towards, and my PhD was on English teaching classrooms. So very much directed towards a standard language regime, right? And also in an institutional space where there are no so-called third spaces or something like that, where there would be experimental room or anything like it. But really, so what that allowed me to do was, I think, draw up a theory of sorting processes between fluid language, fixed language, how that works. And that's fantastic. But what it didn't allow me to do was to explore sort of material language practices in a space that is, I don't want to say less restricted, but that is differently restricted. You know, not restricted by or ordered, differently ordered, not ordered by curricula and grading systems and stuff like that. And so I want to sort of stay with this critical idea on language and how it becomes ordered in practice. But I would like to observe different ordering mechanisms that are not dictated by an institutional setup like the school. So I think maybe that, and I think there's a theoretical connection because I'm taking over the notion of spatial repertoires that I've used and developed further maybe in my PhD. And I'm taking over this notion when I'm talking about word body assemblages and slogans. And I sort of put forward the tentative hypothesis that spatial repertoires are also become racially ordered. so they get imbued with a certain also racializing power, while they also get racialized. So I'm not yet sure how to, but this is, I would say, the theoretical connection that I would make.
That's brilliant. Yeah. I can already translate it into my own research, and how we connect theory and practice to a wider, disseminated and to a wider field almost, and how you connecting the academic theory kind of, of languages, which we usually connect to classroom sort of activity, into completely non-classroom, nothing to do with education in many ways. Feel so that's really inspiring. I'm going to think about this actually myself and see how I can relate this, because my research is also on language learning, but not in the classroom, not related to any classroom, and perhaps even zero classroom influence on this as well. So it's very, very relevant for me to think about this as well.
Yeah, spatial repertoires might be very useful. And the interesting thing is that I think what my PhD did was, because spatial repertoires were developed mostly in extra-institutional spaces. So like marketplaces, sports activities, gyms, dance classes, capoeira, something like that. So that was actually, and there's only one paper as far as I'm aware up to now that actually uses it for university level teaching analysis. So the move was rather to bring this concept from extra-institutional spaces, make it useful for a classroom. And now with what that has brought to it, take it back to the streets, if you wish. So, and I think that's a very useful, I don't know yet, because I haven't really published on the Black Lives Matter thing, and I'm just in the process of thinking it through. But I feel like that is a useful, going in there, taking it, developing it further, taking it out again. And then I'll see what comes out of that. And I think for your thing, spatial repertoires are probably really something to look at. Like there's writing by Penny Cook and Otsuji on metrolingualism on that, 2015, and then there is Kanagaraja Suresh, who did 2018, and then Bainham and Lee 2019, and that's those like the main thingies. I think they might be very helpful.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Lara. It's absolutely fantastic. I think it's, I have just been reading about this today, as well as, learning language beyond the classroom. And because I'm investigating migrants, some of them maybe perhaps are not even in any educational setting and have not been in an educational setting for a very long time. So, and how to connect that, and perhaps they're not even realizing how they're learning the language or whether they are learning the language. So it's definitely not intentional. So it's connecting the dots of learning without realizing or thinking about learning, and drawing those connections, and how to connect theory and research to my own, for example, field or other fields. And I've been even reading about learning language through gaming, which is, obviously they're not thinking about learning a language. They connect to play the games online. So, but the way they're using the language and what happens as a result. So that's incredibly inspiring, and to look into that and try to draw those connections. Very, very interesting and very inspiring.
Sounds really interesting, because then you also have the virtual included in your notion of space, which I think is almost impossible not to do, especially also right now, as we can see.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
I think we are completely in a new era now, and the development of online platforms really affecting the way we're learning, without even necessarily learning explicitly as learning. So it's really something to think about. at least for me. Thank you so much. It was incredibly inspiring, Lara. I really enjoyed your company and our conversation. I know you have another meeting to attend very shortly, but it was great pleasure to talk to you. And I hope you will continue to get involved with Ether, and I hope to see you again and create more and think more together. And it was so great. And thank you so much on behalf of the whole Ether team to all your contribution and dedication and so many inspiring ideas. Thank you so much, Lara.
Thanks so much, Anna. This was really a pleasure. Thanks for the enthusiasm and all the thinking with each other. I really like it. Looking forward to engaging more with all of you.